I want to give a little bit of credit to where credit is due. Sister Karen Hill up in Lynchburg, Virginia. It just so happened that I listened to her message. I was sick one Sunday morning, not too long ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I wasn't able to be here, so I automatically turned on YouTube to go into Lynchburg service, and at least I can lay there with a towel on my head and it propped up on my pillow and watch and listen to it. And thought I was on live, and she was up there, and I thought, well, why is she preaching on Sunday morning? Well, she wasn't. I had accidentally went to their CPMA service the Wednesday before, and it was a blessing to me. And everything she said was just great. And I said, Lord, I've got to bring this to Southside one way or another. Help me to bring it, hopefully the way half as good as she did, but I do have to give her a little bit of credit this evening for that. What does uncharted waters mean? What are the dictionary definition says? If you're in uncharted waters, you are in a situation that is unfamiliar to you, that you have no experience of and don't know what might happen. As Brother Chris and I were even talking just this evening about the subject, he was saying, well, everything's uncharted in our lives. Even tomorrow, we don't know what course of the day may bring in our lives, even tomorrow. I was thinking about different things that's come through recently. Brother and Sister Pulliam bought a house. They're in uncharted waters. When they signed those papers, they didn't know what they were really getting into. And even a new dog, and moving and going different places. And Brother Chris had mentioned the loss of his dad to me tonight. You know, we woke up just a normal day, and all of a sudden we get a phone call one day stating, you know, your father's passed away suddenly. And I remember him on the phone. We were there in the break room at headquarters, and it was his mom on the phone. He said, "Are you sure it's not Grandpa?" And she's like, "No, it's your dad." And it was like a shock, because 66, never been in the doctor for 20, 30 years, and then all of a sudden he passes. And then I think about my mom. You know, when they diagnosed her with cancer, that was uncharted waters. We did not know what to expect with Brother Chris's mom and with my mom. We didn't know. When they say stage 4, you just don't know. And so we were in uncharted waters, and there's things that we go through in our life that we've never experienced that before. I've never experienced having a child, but I'm sure, Sister Pulliam, when you had your first one, you didn't know what to expect. You know, when moms and dads have their children, they just don't know exactly what to expect. When you get married, you think you know what you've got, but you don't know. 20, 30 years down the road, it's uncharted. You don't know what you're going to experience. You know, you may have kids, you may not. You may have animals, you may have job loss, you may have sickness. You know, you may have death, and you just don't know what else is going to happen. Talking about uncharted waters, me and Brother Chris since I told him, he talked a little bit to me about it. He goes, you know, that's kind of like Gilligan's Island. And of course, I was thinking tonight, everybody knows about Gilligan's Island except for maybe Brother Caleb. If he had, he's just going to have to watch an episode sometime. But anyway, it aired for 3 seasons on CBS from September 64 to April 67. It was a series followed by comic adventures of 7 castaways that attempted to survive the island on which they had been shipwrecked. Now, this island, according to Wikipedia, was uncharted. When Brother Chris said Gilligan's Island, before I even looked it up, and of course I wanted to get the whole gist of it, the song came in my mind and I was thinking about it, but I want to see what Wikipedia said. The 2-man crew of the charter boat SS Minnow and 5 passengers on a 3-hour tour from Honolulu run into a tropical storm and are shipwrecked on an uncharted island somewhere and the Pacific Ocean. Of course, their efforts to be rescued was typically thwarted in advertent conduct of the first mate Gilligan. So they needed help. They were on uncharted territory. They were there on an island with just the 7 of them trying to make do until somebody found them. We find several in the Bible that were in uncharted waters. Before I get to some in depth, I was thinking about some Adam and Eve. They were formed, put in a garden. Adam had to name the animals. I mean, this was everything that he had to do. I think about Esther. She was a Jew, but yet she was chosen to be queen to help save her people. The children of Israel were in uncharted waters. They were most of them grown up in Egypt as slaves. God sent them out, and they didn't really know how to act when they got out there. The uncharted land, they didn't know exactly. 40 years they roamed around and didn't quite get it figured out. Generations had to die off before the promised land was found. Mary, I think about Mary, the mother of Jesus, and how an angel appeared to her and said, "You're going to have a son." And she's like, "Huh? What?" I mean, could you imagine? That was uncharted waters. She was going through things that she didn't know. And then for her to tell her espoused spouse, "Oh, by the way, we're having a child," that was uncharted for him. Thankfully, God sent angels to tell both of them, what to do and how to handle the matter. And God took care of them along the way. You can name lots of them. And I believe they're all in this word so that we know that when we go through things, we can get through it. Those things that are uncharted. They went through these things. And of course, our theme is on heritage. Our heritage is right here. Might be, our moms and dads and grandparents and great-grandparents. That's our heritage too. But the Word of God is also our heritage. And these are our examples today. If you'll go with me to Genesis chapter 37, beginning with verse 19. We're going to be talking about Joseph here. And of course, he went through a lot of uncharted waters. He was almost the baby of 12. 12 of the guys. He was number 11 of the guys. His father's favorite. Had a coat of many colors. Got to stay home while the other boys went on their way to work. And that was his life right then. But we find in Genesis chapter 37, beginning with verse 19, his brothers talking here, and they said one to another, "Behold, this dreamer cometh." Of course, we know they were jealous of their brother. He got to stay at home. He was probably one what we'd call today mama's boy. Probably and he was definitely daddy's boy. He had his coat there. It says, "Behold, this dreamer cometh. Come now, therefore, and let us slay him and cast him into some pit. And we will say, some evil beast hath devoured him. And we shall see what will become of his dreams." And Reuben heard it and delivered him out of their hands and said, "Let us not kill him." And Reuben said unto them, "Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness, and lay no hand upon him, that he might rid him out of their hands to deliver him to his father again." Of course, Reuben was trying to help him out and had other intentions. But it came to pass that when Joseph was come unto his brethren, that they stripped Joseph out of his coat and his coat of many colors that was on him. And they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty; there was no water in it. And they sat down to eat bread, and lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead with their camels, bearing spicery and balm and myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. And Judah said unto his brethren, What profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him. For he is our brother in our flesh. And his brethren were content. Then there passed by Midianites, merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph into Egypt. So we see Joseph went from being there at the house to the pit, and now he's been sold. Uncharted waters. Being in the pit there, thankfully he didn't stay there very long because it said he didn't have water, but he went through this. His brothers all just throwing him out in there. They talk about killing him, talking about this, talking about that. Can you imagine? I don't like when my brother and sister get mad at me for a minute or two or a couple of days, but they were absolutely thinking about killing him. He was in uncharted waters. The pits of this life that we go through, God is still with us. No matter what we go through, whatever the unchartedness leads to, God is with us. Chapter 39, and Joseph was brought, verse 1. And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him at the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him thither. Verse 2, and the Lord was with Joseph. So he was bought. He was brought down to Egypt. Potiphar bought him. Now he was going to be his slave. But it says in verse 2, and the Lord was with Joseph. He was with him through these uncharted waters. And he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and served him, and made him overseer, and he made him overseer of his house. And all that he had he put into his hands. And it came to pass from the time that he had made him overseer in his house and all over that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessings of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. So through this uncharted waters, it's kind of going a little good for him now. He was basically a slave, a master, or his master was an Egyptian there, but he was kind of in charge, so to speak. And Potiphar knew God's directing him. And I can trust this guy. I can trust him to do whatever because God is upon him and the Lord has blessed him. And the Lord even blessed Potiphar's house, it said, for Joseph's sake. We get down to verse 19 after Potiphar's wife decides she's going to take advantage of Joseph and see what she could do and see how he would act. This was uncharted to him too. He'd never had a woman come after him before, much less his boss's wife. But yet what does he do? And it came to pass when his master, and he fled away, and when his master heard the words of his wife, what she spake unto him, saying, after this manner did thy servant to me, that his wrath was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. So Joseph's life was kind of like a roller coaster. And same thing with us today. Sometimes our life is like a roller coaster. There's a song that I've listened to recently called Hills and Valleys. God's with us in the valleys, and He's with us on the hills and on the mountaintops. He's with us the whole way. And He was with that roller coaster ride, so to speak, with Joseph. He had a plan. And that plan was for him to go through these uncharted waters. Verse 21, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison. And whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him. The Lord was with Joseph. And that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. So there again, God was with him through every step of the way. And when we look back on our lives and see the things that we've been through and how he directed us and got us through those things. And he will continue to do that. Sometimes we think, woe is me, our next thing that we're going through. But God will see us through. Chapter 40, verse 20. After he's in prison, his new buddies, the chief butler, the chief baker, been in there for a while, they start having dreams, and Joseph's able to interpret those dreams. Of course, I can't imagine being in the prison, deep down in the dungeon, but at least he had favor with the prison guard. And it came to pass on the third day, this is verse 20, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast unto all the servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants, and he restored the chief butler unto his butlership again, and he gave the cup unto Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them. Verse 23, yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgot him. Now remember, Joseph said, oh, by the way, when you're up there, remember me. Tell them what happened, tell them, And of course, the butler forgot him for a while. It took a while for him to remember. But one thing about it is the Lord will not forget us when we're in uncharted waters. He won't forget us. He won't leave us nor forsake us, the Word says. But He will be there. Thankfully, he was eventually remembered. And we see, before we go into chapter 50, we see Joseph brought back, established as governor. God had a plan. There was getting ready to be a famine in the land. And God had set him through that roller coaster ride right where God wanted him to be. And if you find in Genesis chapter 50, verse 14, skipping very much, if you've not ever read the story, read it. Most of us know all about it. But Joseph, after his father died, thankfully he got to see his dad again, his brothers. Joseph returned into Egypt, he and his brethren and all that went up with him to bury his father after he had buried his father. And when Joseph's brethren saw that their father was dead, they said, Joseph will peradventure hate us, and will certainly requite us for all the evil which we did unto him. And they sent a messenger unto Joseph, saying, Thy father did command before he died, saying, So shall ye say unto Joseph, Forgive, I pray thee now, the trespass of thy brethren and their sin, for they did unto thee evil, and now we pray thee, give thee trespass of the servants of the God of thy father. And Joseph wept when they spake unto him. His brethren also went and fell down before his face and said, Behold, we be thy servants. And Joseph said unto them, Fear not, for am I in the place of God? But as for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass, as it is this day, to save much people alive. Now therefore fear ye not. I will nourish you and your little ones. And he comforted them and spake kindly unto them. And Joseph dwelt in Egypt, he and his father's house. And Joseph lived 110 years. So along this roller coaster ride, when Daddy died, they were all in a predicament. The boys was like, wait a minute. He's not going to like us now. Dad's gone. But he said, you meant it for evil. but God meant it for good. You meant this whole thing that put me on this path. God had it all planned out. It meant it for good, to save his household and those around him. Joseph could have jumped ship. He could have just taken off and said, I'm not feeding any of them. I'm not doing anything. They've been bad to me. Or even cut the boys off right as Dad died. But he didn't. It says of a sailor to jump ship means to leave the ship on which one is serving without having obtained permission to do so. We cannot jump ship, so to speak. We have to live a good example to those who are coming up behind us and being faithful, because they're going to have uncharted waters. And when they can read in the Word and read in people that have been in the church of God how they went through uncharted waters, they can say, they went through. They went through persecution. They went through, churches not having hardly any money to go on. They kept the lights on. They kept things going because they wanted to serve the Lord and be good examples. When we see some who are... I want to go to Acts for just a few moments. And for time's sake, I won't mention, but the early church, if you'll read in Acts chapter 2 and Acts chapter 5, that can be your homework for this week. The things that the early church done, they had started out in uncharted waters. They didn't know what to do. Christ had left the scene like he said he would. He'd left his 12. Well, Matthias come along, the 12th one. But he left them there to preach and minister. That was uncharted waters. But yet 3,000 got saved after Peter preached. And this is the guy that always had his foot in his mouth. But it was uncharted. But the Lord helped him to get through. And if you'll go to Acts chapter 27. I've read this, but I've never really looked into it before. But in chapter 27, it talks about some of Paul's journey. Of course, he was literally on the water. Some of these people that are examples were not necessarily on the water. But Paul here was on the water. In verse 14 it says, not long after they'd been sailing for days, there arose against it a tempest wind called Euroclydon. And when the ship was caught and could not bear up into the wind, we let her drive. And after running under a certain island, which is called Clauda, we had much work to come by the boat, which when they had taken up, they used helps, girding the ship, and fearing lest they should fall into the quicksands, strake sail, and so were driven. And we being exceedingly tossed with a tempest, the next day they lighted the ship. And the third day we cast out with our own hands the tackling of the ship. They were getting rid of everything. And when neither sun nor stars in many days appeared, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope that we should be saved was then taken away. But after long abstinence, Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, Sirs, you should have hearkened unto me, and not have loosed from Crete, and to have gained this harm and loss. And now I exhort you to be of good cheer. That kind of made me chuckle, because I'm like, here they are. They're out in the middle of the sea. The tempest is blowing, and they're throwing stuff overboard. And he's like, be of good cheer. He's like, we're in uncharted waters, but we're about to get some help. And same with us today. We might be in uncharted waters today, but we've got some help coming. For there shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship. For there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve, saying, Fear not, thou must be brought before Caesar, and lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with thee. Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God that it shall be even as it was told to me. Paul believed what the Lord told him. He goes, I believe it, and it's going to happen. If you'll go down to verse 44, at the end of the chapter. I'm trying to find the verse real quick. There's 276 people on that boat. It says in the chapter. It says, and the rest, well, let me go up to 43. But the centurion, willing to save Paul, kept them from their purpose, and commanded that they which could swim should cast themselves first into the sea and get to land. And the rest, some on boards and some on broken pieces of the ship. And it came to pass that they escaped, all safe to land. All of them. 276 of them. I was thinking about the Titanic and how it was sort of in uncharted waters because, well, it hit the iceberg. But I think they kind of knew where they were going. But how many lives were lost? But God took care of all these guys. He said, but they were in, after 15 days, it went on to 14 days it was talking about in the chapter, and then the next day it went on. So they went through all this day after day after day. And Paul, be of good cheer. Can we be of good cheer tonight? Knowing that God is going to take care of things. Even though we might not see it right now, we might be in the pit, or we might be in prison, or we might be, falsely accused. But God will take care of us. The Bible is our map. Nowadays, there's probably not any uncharted waters. With GPS and all the things, technology and all of that. But this is where we can go to for our map. And nothing will be uncharted. Because these guys in here, the examples here, they've been there and done that, so to speak. I want to read a quote by a girl I found, Brianna Johnson. She was struggling with many things, but she said, if we find ourselves in uncharted waters, on an unexpected course, remember that we are not alone in this ship. There is a crew surrounding us, and as we aid one another, each sharing in the work, we will move forward together. I thought, the Church of God. This girl don't know about the Church of God, but I'm thinking, as a body, we can be crew members to help one another through uncharted waters. Paul was there. I believe that he was there for a reason. Not only to just go around here and there, but he was there and placed there for the Lord to use him even on the boat. As we learn to relinquish the wheel to the pilot of our souls, or the helm to the captain, he can make the necessary course corrections. Have we been off course some? He can make us get back on the right track. Maybe go around whatever we need to go around in those uncharted waters. Maybe an iceberg. Go around it. Help us get through it. We may venture through storms ahead, but with the Master at the helm, safe passage is certain. I thank the Lord that we can go to Him at any time. When I look at the song and the words to Leaning on the Everlasting Arms, it says, what have I to dread? What have I to fear? Leaning on the everlasting arms. When we're leaning on His arms, when we take His direction in these uncharted waters, we don't have to worry. It's hard sometimes because we want to fix it ourselves and we want to put away the road map. There's several times that I'm driving, I don't tell Brother Chris, oh, I don't need a map. Or I've already mapped it out before we got in the car. It don't always work that way. So we can't just say, well, I've already read this once, 3 times. I don't need it anymore. But we're in uncharted waters every single day. And by the Lord's help, we're going to get there one day with His direction, with His guidance. I want us to take a few moments to pray tonight. Ask the Lord to help us to learn to relinquish the wheel to the pilot, the wheel to the driver. As the song says, Jesus, take the wheel, or the captain to the helm of the ship, to lead us and guide us exactly where we need to go. Because like I said, tomorrow we don't know what we're going to get to go through. Exciting times. We just don't know. But we can trust in the Lord. Let us go to prayer tonight.